Hey guys, you're listening to Metal Matters, a weekly gimme radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hill. If you like metal, punk, hardcore, or anything extreme, you've come to the right place. So subscribe and never miss out. Let's welcome back Ralph Schmidt of Ultha. Good friend of mine. He's been on the show a couple times already. And he's stepping up to become a co-host on this thing. And it's been a lot of fun talking to him. And I always look forward to having these conversations. So this week we're going to be talking about Integrity and how important that band is to metal, hardcore, and both of us as creative people. If you want to follow me on social media, you can hit me up at Michael Hill on Facebook, Michael_DC_Hill on Instagram. And I'm on Twitter, but I don't really use Twitter that much. And if you enjoy the show, please rate and review. It helps out quite a bit. Welcome, Ralph, back to the podcast. And like everyone else on the globe, you're currently experiencing the throes of this global pandemic. So how have you been dealing with all this stuff?
First of all, thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure. Europe has been in the stranglehold of that virus for a while now. I mean, all my friends in Italy are pretty much fucked. They were like the forerunners for everything, where they had the big shutdowns and everything. And the world around us just wouldn't listen or wouldn't see. And now we all have to face the consequences. So for me, it was that it's 3 weeks ago now. 3 weeks ago, the government decided to shut down the schools. And so I didn't have to go to school anymore. But I have to go every other day just for a few hours because there are a lot of parents working in the system relevant jobs, they call it. So like doctors and pharmacists and people like this. And if they have kids and they can't find someone to look after them, they can send them to school and there will be someone watching them. And that's what I do right now. So I have a lot of time off sitting at home and doing tasks for the kids, which I send out via email, and I have phone calls with them to see if they understand what I want them to learn. So that's my thing as a teacher. 2 weeks ago, they decided that you can't be outside with more than two people. And if you're doing something together, it should be someone that lives in the same flat as you or in the same house. So they have restrictions now. And if you get busted outside with more than two people, it costs 200 euros a person. There's no entertainment industry anymore besides TV. And that's the shopping malls they all have lines on the floor now that they made out of duct tape. So you have to keep your distance. It's crazy, but I think in comparison to a lot of people right now, I'm actually coping with it pretty well because social distancing is something I was practicing for a long time. And I live in a bit more rural part of Cologne, so I live next to a little forest part, and I go jogging every day. I go ride my bike, I write music at home, I read, and I try to stay sane. And so far, I've been dealing with it pretty well. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. And the reports that I've seen is that Germany is they're doing a little bit better than other countries. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the rules that you outlined and how people generally seem to be complying with those rules. Yeah. And that on the reverse side, I'm living in Brooklyn right now, and I'm in the epicenter of the, ground zero here in the U.S. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that people don't really follow rules here. And these are the consequences to that. And, I'm not saying that do what you're told or whatever, but in the face of the logical thing here is to comply with some of these guidelines that the medical industry has put forth, like people who know what the hell they're talking about, like doctors, scientists are saying to maintain, a certain distance between people. And literally up till a couple of days ago, I saw kids playing basketball together, like out in this park. And I'm just like, then of course there's the famous videos of kids down in Florida partying together and on, playing volleyball on the beach and doing Jello shots and all this other stuff. And, I think that's why it's out of hand over here, and but in New York it's deadly serious. I mean, the scientists are predicting that in 2 weeks we're going to hit the peak here of infection, and so I'm saying that I have at least another 2 months of working at home, social distancing, and everything being closed. So
yeah.
It is what it is, and it's a mental game more than anything. I'm concerned about my parents, but the county they live in has only had about 35 cases and no deaths. So
that's good.
Yeah, I feel relieved, but still very cautious about what their experiences are. So.
Yeah. And it has taken the people a while here to actually agree to that. So we had these people that also did the parties, but that died down really fast when the Robert Koch Institute, which is like the medical facility that does like the most science research about this virus, and they give like a press conference every second day.
Right.
And they're like, people start listening to them. So just yesterday, I was riding my bike, and there's like a big park area here close to where I live with a lake, and people hang out there all the time in groups, and there was no one. There was just like 2 or 3 people sitting in the sun because the weather is fucking nice.
Right.
And so people started like to see like it's maybe better to stay inside and not like go out and party right now.
Yeah, I go out for walks. I have to get exercise. I got to move my body around, and
yeah, me too.
And that's there's not that many people on the street, which is like very eerie. And I haven't been into Manhattan in 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. Yeah. But I've seen video and I've seen photographs of what downtown Manhattan looks like right now, and it's like I Am Legend or something. It's just and that's even weirder because I don't think it's never not busy there. It's always busy, always. Yeah. Where my office is right by Penn Station, and that's like the epicenter, one of the epicenters of travel in New York City. And there's no one on the streets. It's crazy.
No. And it's a good time to actually go back to all these movies like Outbreak or 28 Days Later and The Stand, I Am Legend.
Yeah.
It's really enjoyable right now because it's kind of like, look what we've got ourselves into.
Kind of, yeah, I could see that, Now this topic that we're talking about kind of fits into the subject of this week's show, which is our mutual admiration for the band Integrity, which has always had a very apocalyptic vision for humanity. And so, I mean, that's a band that over the years, I mean, you and I have known each other we're on our second decade. And,
yes.
And we love a lot of the same bands. We have a lot of the same ideas about music and just, creativity in general. And for both of us, Integrity has been a band that has helped mold what we do, as well as giving us tons of inspiration. So, yeah. So I just figured we talk about our experiences with the band, some of our favorite records, some of our favorite songs, and things like that, and just kind of appreciate all the work that Dwid has done along with the various members of the band.
Yeah, it's been 25 years now that I'm into that band. It's one of the bands that I liked the longest, and they never disappointed me. Seen them a gazillion times, played with them. I even played on stage with Dwid. And so, yeah, it's crazy. I love that band so much. And I think the song Dawn of a New Apocalypse is pretty much the perfect title and soundtrack for what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, definitely. And he's been a guest on this show twice actually, and
Yeah.
it's always good having him on. He likes to talk about stuff, which I think is very important if you're going to be a guest on a podcast. So he's a good guest to have.
Yeah, and he's also someone you could actually pleasantly listen to because what he says is genuinely interesting and well funded. Like there's not a lot of like hot air, and that's what I always enjoyed about him, about his work. And when you talk to him, he's such a nice guy, despite his reputation sometimes. And it's just like awesome. Yeah, I really love that guy.
A little precursor to something that's going to be coming out this fall is he has done guest vocals on a Tombs track for our forthcoming LP.
Wow, no shit.
I'll send you I have a demo I can send you, and yeah, it's really cool, man. I was I pretty much, when I listen back to it still to this day, I'm like, man, that's like fucking cool, man. Dwid doing guest vocals, singing words that I wrote. It's like pretty fucking cool,
Wow, awesome.
Yeah. So for me, I can't quite pinpoint when I first discovered the band. I know that it was at some point in the mid '90s, and during that period of time, it's like I've never been a very big fan of hardcore music the way that some people are. Like, for example, I missed out on the whole Youth Crew vibe. The both waves of Youth Crew bands, like even in the '80s, like Bold, Youth of Today, like that kind of stuff never really resonated with me. And even the second wave of like In My Eyes, 10 Yard Fight, that kind of thing, Strife. None of those bands really. I mean, Strife's not really a Youth Crew band, but I always lumped them in with those bands, and I just never really was into that kind of thing. And in the early '90s to mid '90s, I was I just discovered black metal, and I was listening to bands like I Hate God, Buzz Oven, more dark kind of negative style shit like that. And I was starting to get into reading a lot of the books that Feral House released.
Mm.
So, I was into like serial killers, the occult, Satanism, Charles Manson, and the whole narrative that surrounded the Charles Manson sort of Tate LaBianca murders were like a fascination that I had back then. So when I stumbled across Humanity is the Devil by Integrity, I saw all the Process Church of Final Judgment, 4-Pi imagery, and without even hearing the band, I knew that it was something that I should at least check out. And I saw that it was on Victory, which initially wasn't something that drew me in because I associated Victory Records with music I didn't like. And, with the exception of Bloodlet and Dead Guy, Integrity was really the only band on that label that I cared about. And when I started listening to the music, all those pieces kind of came together. It was like a right place at the right time kind of situation for me.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Same here. I mean, we talked about it in the in my the other podcast I did about my like bringing up with music, and I was into horror movies starting when I was 12, and I was listening to black metal ever since I was 13. So I found my way into hardcore and punk later through Headbangers Ball, where I saw like some hardcore bands, and then I did my research like I always did. We had like catalogs of like in fanzines. They were like these, you can order here, order this, order that, reviews. And I just like, I had access to money because my father always like said, you want to learn English, you learn English best by listening to music and translating lyrics. So he paid music and I had to translate lyrics. And so I just ordered and in some order I remember it was like from a small, I don't even know, like I think it was Lost and Found, this like catalog, which was also a label that fucked over a lot of bands. It's like pretty infamous here in Germany. But they had like, I think I ordered Neglect Ended and Earth Crisis Firestorm, the 7-inch, and Systems Overload by Integrity in one order. and that pretty much like shifted all my focus on this kind of music, because it was heavy, but it was a bit smarter. Like the people were, I don't know, like not as corny as a lot of the black metal people. And so like Ended had like the depression that I was into. I don't know like why this clicked, because back then I wasn't depressed or nothing, but Systems Overload, ever since I put that on the first time, it just blew me away. And then shortly after, Humanity's the Devil came out, and then I was hooked.
Yeah, and like for me, Earth Crisis is definitely another band I like that was on Victory. I don't know how I left them off, but being vegan and all that sort of stuff. I mean, they also had this like apocalyptic, like violent sort of vibe about them.
Yeah.
And I always thought they were great live too back then. So
yeah,
for me, I remember I was working at the Newbury Comics warehouse, and I think that was kind of this epicenter for dudes in bands at that time in the 90s. Like there was like some of the guys from ISIS worked there, Cast Iron Hike, Blood for Blood, a dude from Sam Black Church. Everyone that worked at the Newbury Comics warehouse worked there because they were in a band, because you could go on tour for like 5 weeks and come back and still have a job. And I think that that was like what turned it into this kind of like music appreciation like day, like when you went to work. You found out about tons of different music, and also Newbury Comics, for anyone who's obviously, if you don't live in New England, you don't know who the hell this is. They're like a for lack of a better term, a Hot Topic before Hot Topic existed. I mean, you could go to one of the locations in New England and get like hair dye, in the 90s, like X-Files mugs, calendars, and an incredible selection of records. They always had great record music buyers. You can buy, Joy Division records, hardcore records. They stocked even, stuff like Death in June you could buy there. You can buy, Metallica, everything, Slayer, black metal records. And it was pretty crazy. So when on Tuesday, when the new records were going out, I remember seeing all this stuff. And, back then I was like, okay, there's like hardcore music. The lyrics are about, being vegan, being a straight edge person, the scene, violence on the streets, life in the Lower East Side, the system, stuff like that. And I couldn't really relate to a lot of that stuff because that wasn't the mindset that I had at the time. And when I bought Humanity is the Devil, I realized the lyrics were not about any of that stuff. And
no.
And not only was it not about any of the things that I was bored with, it was about just like darkness and horror movies and ideas of, philosophies and anti-Christianity and stuff like that. It was basically the subject matter of kind of like the more extreme metal music that I was into, and the playing and the song structures, all that sort of stuff was more in line with the kind of things that I liked, and there's like guitar solos and thrash riffs and things like that, double bass, that kind of thing. And that was it just opened me up to that whole style.
Yeah, and then it's they ever since they started out being a straight edge band, like with Die Hard and all this shit, and like when the Harder They Fall demo, and you had like almost straight edge lyrics back then, but also like on the first record, Those Who Fear Tomorrow, like you started and you have like all these incredible song titles. The lyrics are just insanely well done, and they're like, that's what got me hooked on them. Is ever since I became an Integrity fan, I started looking at lyrics a lot, and not in the way like you can do like sad lyrics in a smart way when they're easy, like for example Mike McTernan and Damnation AD. I love that band, and it's pretty straightforward. It's like, I feel like shit, that's why I feel like shit. But like all these lyrics in these posy core bands also, that never clicked with me. And then you have like this metaphoric super dark imagery, and as you said, like Satanism and these weird ass religious maniacs and everything that Dwid like brought into these lyrics, but in a smart way, and that was so interesting. And yeah, it's the subtext to all he did in the visual art, in the music, and he's been doing it forever, and he's been on top of the game ever since.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And the fact that he has a background in art and design too, made the Integrity records look different, and the imagery of the band, the logo, and that skull. It's very unique and identifiable.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the first things that got me hooked, because before I became an Integrity fan, I was already a Misfits and Sam Hain and Danzig fan. And then I ordered the Systems Overload CD, and it had, like, in the cover art, it had the skull in the top right corner, I think. And I was like, holy shit, that skull is cool. And then it's like I got the Humanity's Devil CD, and it had the skull more prominently, and I'm like, holy shit, this is amazing. And it's like these small traits, everything's executed so well, and this skull is just as iconic as as the Danzig skull to me.
Yeah, that skull actually. It's when Dwid was on the show, we discussed where that came from, and it was, once again, the same way the Danzig Sam Hain skull came from a comic book.
Yeah, right.
That came from Blood, a Tale, a graphic novel that came out, like, I don't know, in the late '80s or something like that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite works by the band? I mean, the band started in 1988. And that's that's like over 30 years ago at this point. And I don't know, they got like over 50 releases. Obviously not all LPs, but they have a lot of material out. There's been enough members in the band to make like 5 bands, which is common with a lot of other bands out there. And they've on every label you can imagine. Victory, Relapse, Death Wish, 389, Magic Bullet,
Relapse.
Yeah, it's real, along with Ringworm on Relapse.
Yeah. It's for me, I think I'm kind of like the old school Integrity fan. I think that the answer that most people would give is like, I'm like, for me, the unfuckwithable stuff is the Melnick phase. So with A double, like, on guitars, which would be Those Who Fear Tomorrow, Humanity's the Devil, Systems, Season and the Size of Days. These records are, the best. Then there was the phase with Intech 2000 and Project Regenesis, which I still like, but it was weird. But that was the first time we played with them, with my old band. And then after Closure, which was more like a Sam Hain band, with To Die For, he got back into, I think he moved to Belgium then, and hung out with all these guys from Liar and Congress and all these Belgian Hate Thousand bands. And he got back on track, and all the records after that, like Blackest Curse, Suicide Black Snake, and all the records, they were more in the vein of the old Integrity, and I love them a lot. But for me, it's like these first records, they're like the thing. And for me, my favorite release still is the split 7-inch with Mayday, because it has Rebirth and Kingdom of Heaven, and they are my absolute favorite songs they ever did.
Yeah, I always tend towards the earlier material as well. Maybe because it was the first record I heard by them. Humanity is probably my my favorite Integrity record. Just, I think the production on it's awesome. I mean, it has the song Hollow, which that song grabs you, and then the Humanity is the Devil track, which kind of, this touched on another thing I appreciate about the band, and specifically about Dwid, is people weren't, at that point, bands weren't, in hardcore at least, weren't really incorporating like industrial or soundscapes or any of that kind of stuff into their work, and at least to my knowledge. And that, because concurrent to me being in the hardcore metal, I also was starting to discover bands like Throbbing Gristle and White House, and that sort of noise industrial world that that was forming a lot of the ideas I think that Dwid was into as well. And that kind of tied it together for me, and that record in particularly stands out. And
Yeah, that's they on that record. I mean, the intro vocal test is still one of the best intros that ever occurred. It's just such a good idea. And I mean, it has the song Psychological Warfare, which was the song that my old band Repugnant played on stage with Dwid singing when we hung out with them on the Closure tour. And that song is like, in the short form, is Psy Warfare, which became his industrial noise act, which he did together with his ex-wife Lisa. And that was also my first encounter with noise, harsh noise, and all this stuff, because before that I've never heard that. I mean, I was 16, 17 by that time, and through that I also got into all these noise bands like Throbbing Gristle and all these industrial stuff. And yeah, I mean, I remember when we played, like Repugnant played with Integrity 2000, I think it was 99, and I talked to Dwid there, and I'm like, dude, why are there no lyrics in the Season in the Size of Days record? And he's like, oh yeah, didn't want to print them, but I have a Psy Warfare 7-inch here, which is called the Candyman EP, and it has a copy of all the Seasons in the Size of Days lyrics in it.
That's awesome.
And I'm really, why? It's like, I don't know, I just thought it was funny. So like, I got that 7-inch from him, and he gave it to me as a gift. And I remember when we drove home, like with my band back then, I think I wasn't, well, it was 99, then I was allowed to drive a car. But like, I was in the car with the other guys, and it's like, yo, so guess what I have? I have the lyrics to Season in the Size of Days. And like, literally, like Andy, the singer, he'd like break the car. It's like, what? Are you fucking kidding me? So we like parked on the side of the road, played that record, and read the lyrics to it. That's like how obsessed we were with that band.
Yeah, he's a great writer, man, and that Psy Warfare stuff. I mean, that's cool that that's still active too. I mean, there's a new Relapse is putting out a Psy Warfare record.
Yes,
unless it's out already by the time this hits the streets, this episode. But yeah, it's at the time though, that was rare. I mean, in real time, when in the 90s, there really wasn't a lot of that going on in hardcore music, and I think that, like I said earlier, the fact that this guy was like into this stuff, it mirrored a lot of the same interests that I had. And because the kids that I knew at that time that were into hardcore music, they didn't want to hear about Merzbow or earlier stuff like Throbbing Gristle or Boyd Rice and Non and all that stuff. And and the fact that an influential band like Integrity was exploring those avenues was fucking cool, I thought.
But also back in that time, I remember that like my bands, like these guys, I met them in school because I was the younger kid. I changed schools when I was like getting to the 11th grade, and I was like the chubby loner kid with the hardcore t-shirts, and they were like 2 grades above me, and they were like, do you listen to these kind of bands? You want to play in a band? And I'm like, oh, okay. So by that time I was just playing bass, and they asked me if I want to play guitar. So I borrowed a guitar from my neighbor and taught myself to play a power chord. So I joined that band, and at first it was called Absent X, like a classic straight edge band.
Yeah.
But these guys, they introduced me to all that shit. And like Andy and Ingo, these 2 guys, I owe them so much, because they were like my lookup. Like I looked up to them so much, and they gave me all that kind of music, and they were so obsessed with all the Holy Terror stuff. So it started out like also with Confront, and then One Life Crew and Ringworm, and they had all these old 7-inches, and they made me mixtapes, and it was so incredible. And they loved Integrity, and through them, my love for them got pushed even further. And then we changed names to Repugnant before the death metal band happened. And we changed our style, and we started playing more like this Holy Terror kind of hardcore. but we were just shitty musicians back then, which is a shame because it could have been a real good band.
Yeah, let's also address the fact that Integrity was one of the bands that kind of architected the quote unquote metalcore sound, really. I mean, there was maybe a short list of bands that I would put on that. Obviously, Starkweather, Integrity, Ringworm, In Cold Blood, a lot of like the Holy Terror type bands, and obviously earlier in the 80s there was metal hardcore crossover, but that was different. There's Cro-Mags, Carnivore, like that kind of thing. But the quote unquote metalcore sound, I think, really started was something that started with bands like Integrity, and I kind of give them credit for that.
Yeah, but I think it's like what you and I like see in that kind of as a metalcore thing, that like they just sounded way heavier and were down tuned, and like I can see this, but like what became metalcore eventually.
Oh well,
I think that started through all the vegan jihad straight edge mosh bands that were obsessed with like the Raining Blood mosh part. And then they all of a sudden found Slaughter of the Soul by At the Gates. And then you had all these bands, and that was metalcore. And I really hate that. Like, that was absolutely not my thing. But it was incredibly popular here. But the thing is that all these bands that you just mentioned, they were the bands, I mean, especially Starkweather is also a band I love. And they were not popular. You had the old school kids that were into like Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, and all the newer bands in that vein. Excuse me. And then you had the mosh kids that were into, I don't know, Earth Crisis, Disembodied, and all the shit my best friend Danny is just exploring, because she just found the phase where she started like listening to Chokehold and all these bands. And I'm like, wow, you're 40 now and you find out about these now. But that's cool. Like it's a lot of memories. Like she plays a lot of this stuff, and I'm like, oh, I remember that. It was kind of cool. But a lot of that shit doesn't hold up. But
I think Disembodied kind of holds up though. Actually, they're pretty sick though,
Yeah, they're like, I mean, some of the bands are, but like most of the shit, I'm like, oh wow. Like, but no one was into, like, I mean, New York hardcore was also big, like Madball, Sick of It All, Agnostic Front. But this kind of like this bubble of Ringworm, Integrity, and all these bands, they weren't popular by that time. And when we tried to play shows with our sound, we didn't find anyone that wanted to have us on their shows, because we were not like the vegan straight edge kids, and we were not the old school kids. And that's the thing. It was also, again, fitting perfectly to that being like an outsider kid. This kind of music was outsider music within this hardcore scene.
Yeah, that's the vibe I picked up too. From Integrity, and because as you know, that's hardcore music is generally geared, for better or for worse, towards younger people. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that they're bands like Sick of It All are out there playing and doing their thing. That's great, but it's geared towards younger people who are trying to figure out where they fit in their hierarchy or in their society. And as a result of that, even though there's this concept that there's no rules and freedom and all this other stuff, there are tons of rules within hardcore about what you can sing about, what your lyrics are about, whether or not you eat meat, whether you drink or you don't drink, or if you're from the streets or if you're in a crew or whatever, you know what I mean? And I felt like, Integrity and a lot of the Holy Terror bands, Ringworm comes to mind, did not adhere to any of those rules and became popular eventually, but were never really embraced the same way, Madball, Agnostic Front, that kind of stuff was embraced in a wider sense.
Yeah. And also it's incredible when you look at all the splits that Integrity did, and you had like people say they were the founding fathers for metalcore, and they influenced bands like Terror and Hatebreed, and I can see that. But they even did a split with Hatebreed, which features one of the best songs that Integrity ever did. But it's weird that like I don't see a lot of Hatebreed fans putting on Integrity record and saying, oh yeah, I can, that's my wife. They want to have more like Throwdown and all these kind of bands.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Integrity and Hatebreed. Back in I don't know, man, like this must have been 96 or so. This guy, his name is Ian McFarlane, who ended up becoming a documentary film producer. He was in a band called Polyglot from Portland, Maine area, like way up, maybe not even Portland, like some town in Maine. And he was friends with Aaron Harris, who later, who went on to become the drummer in ISIS, and now is a film score composer. And I remember he was like very into networking and putting his band out there, and which is great. I mean that's awesome. People should do that with their music. But I remember he was telling me that he was going to fill in with Hatebreed on the tour that they did opening for Integrity, which is like, it's insane. And I hope I got that right. I hope this isn't some like onset, Alzheimer's for me, but I believe that actually happened, man. When we were preparing for this, I remember going through some of my journals and I was like, oh yeah, this is what happened, So that goes to show you that like, Hatebreed in a lot of ways were disciples of Integrity, as well as, in my opinion, bands like Entombed and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and then they became this like larger than life band, really. I mean, they rose above being a hardcore band. I remember when Hatebreed first played in Boston. It was when I lived in Boston. There was this small, very, very. I mean, this place held maybe 80 people, and it was this place. It was called the Penalty Box, I think, and it was like some tough guy, like hardcore thing, and they were the first band that went on. It was Hatebreed, and that might have been their very first show in Boston, and then they just became this huge. I mean, Hatebreed's like Slayer, really. I mean, they're that sort of that level of they have their own style fans. It's not really hardcore kids. It's not really metal kids these days. It's like a whole different thing,
It's all the people that are registered in gyms. They're all
they all have memberships at gyms. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and they were never like my kind of band. Also, Terror was never my kind of band. But I can see like why they state that Integrity was an influence to them. And what I would like to ask you, because I was just like we were going out wandering last week, Danny and I played her Systems Overload because I was like, okay, so you're working through all this hardcore stuff now. Let's go to the essentials. And I played her that record and she's like, oh yeah, I like that. It's like, so I told her, because she was always going to Roadburn a lot, and she's like, I remember that Integrity got booked to play Roadburn, and that like some people were like, why is this hardcore band playing Roadburn? I'm like, why is that a problem? Like they fit there better than like a lot of other bands. And then I was like, okay, so what kind of influences do you hear in them? And that's what I wanted to ask you. If you think of Integrity, they didn't listen to a lot of other hardcore bands, but like what kind of bands do you think is like molded their sound? Because I think you can clearly hear it, what kind of bands they were into.
Oh yeah, I mean the first indicator from day one when I first put on Humanity is the Devil, I was like, Slayer. This is like thrash, metal, hard rock music, because the guitar solos, there's like Slayer riffs played with like a very punk vibe, which, and that's kind of what, I mean, for my trajectory through music, I was into heavy metal and hard rock very first. That's the first, music I got into, aside from like the stuff my parents listened to, like 50s, like girls group stuff. And then I discovered punk. And then I discovered thrash, and the reason why I like thrash is because there is this like punk aesthetic to it, and kind of like Integrity brought it in a way like full circle, because they were like inspired. I mean, because those guys I'm in the same age, Dwid and I are about the same age, so it's like I imagine his trajectory through music being similar, You know, like, okay,
Yeah.
cool, we like Black Flag and the Cro-Mags, things like that. But we also like UFO and the Scorpions and shit, you know what I mean? And the Melnick brothers, probably the same. And some of the other members of the band, like Chris Smith, who was in Keel Hall, he and I are like, you know, I mean, he's a good friend of mine, and I know for a fact that he's heavily influenced by, you know, like classic rock and like, you know, UFO, and you know, the dudes in Ringworm are the same way. They're into like Kiss and, you know, as well as the Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front. And that's kind of like that Integrity being the first Clevo band that I got into, you know, Holy Terror band. That's what I heard. I heard guys who were into like Slayer playing punk music, punk influenced hardcore or whatever, and then the other layer of the philosophy on top of it, which is at that point, I was literally only listening to shit that had like intense darkness associated with the lyrics. Like in the 90s, I was like only into like, you know, like bands like I Hate God and Buzz Oven and, you know, Neurosis, you know, the AMREP, some of the darker, more aggressive AMREP bands, like industrial music. And the lyrical content is what brought that to the table, along with like the thrashy metallic riffs. And then, you know, there is like some definite old school hardcore elements in there, but it's played in a way that is more reminiscent of like metal than hardcore. So that's my analysis of like what it sounds like.
You want to hear mine?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Because I think it pretty much, like, if you hear like what I thought, because it was especially with the systems overload thing, you will totally see that why you and I both love this band so much, because it's just fitting. So of course Slayer, the Melnick, Aaron's guitar style, like the riffs, these insane solos and parts of songs where you don't think that needs a solo, and he still does like a double solo on top of it.
Yeah.
So, Slayer. I think if you listen to Systems and to Humanity's the Devil, Black Sabbath, from the guitar tone, and like like also Celtic Frost, the typical guitar stuff, the punk drive of Discharge, and a lot of Motorhead, who also like. Did you know that Lemmy spoke an introduction to an Integrity song?
Yeah, that's on. Isn't that on the Den of Iniquity collection?
Yeah, it's actually the song from the split with Hatebreed, which I found in another compilation. There's so many compilations, but yeah, like that's that. So Motorhead, and I think also because we all know that Dwid is also, especially if you listen to the Closure record, which is pretty much a Misfits Samhain record. So there's the Danzig influence, and also Bauhaus, and of course Mighty Sphincter, which was a band that I also found out about because of Dwid.
That's interesting. You brought up Mighty Sphincter, which we'll have to address shortly, because we just recently lost the guitar player from the band, and I know that you and I have Doug Clark, the guitarist. You and I have a connection over that band as well. So we got to talk about that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we talk a lot about the early material, but I also like the new records too. I think Howling for the Nightmare Shall Consume.
Yes,
that's fucking awesome, man. That's we got Dominic Romeo in the band, and you know the A389 guy. I think that and also he was in Pulling Teeth too.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's...
he was a big fan of Integrity for ages, and I think I read an interview with Dominic where he just said like it's like a dream come true. Like I've been a fan of that band, I've been friends with Dwid, and now I can actually play in that band, and he can pull off all the stuff that A Double did. So like this record and the split with Krieg is definitely like the most Integrity they've sounded ever since Season in the Size of Days.
True. Agreed. 100%. And also Pulling Teeth. I remember they had a record that my good friend Will Tarrant released on Chainsaw Safety Records, and he gave me that record, and I was like, oh wow, these guys must really like Integrity as well. So Pulling Teeth is definitely another band that's a disciple of Integrity, and I think it's awesome that he's playing in the band, you know.
Yes.
And but yeah, Howling. There's the song "I Am the Spell," which is, I guess, is kind of like a single off of that record because they have a video and all that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
that's a great song. And also, there's the band definitely captures the old school sound, but also that's one of their more yeah. There's almost like this black metal influence on it too, like with blast beats and things like that.
Yes.
And I love that. So that's immediately something that I gravitate towards for the newer material.
Yeah, that's the thing I always thought. Like, I'm curious how long it will take until Dwid incorporates blast beats in Integrity, and I think they started out on the Blackest Curse. I think that was the first time they actually did that. But like on Howling, it's made in the perfect way. It's just also the split with Krieg just makes so much sense. And yeah, it's a killer record. When they came out, I had it on heavy rotation for weeks, and it was I haven't done that in a while with New Integrity stuff. Like, I always listen to it, I always enjoy it, but that was really like, had to have it on vinyl, had to play it like for weeks straight, and I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's it's a great album, and I'm looking forward to having more material. They played last year in Boston with All Out War, and I wanted to go up there because I got some of my best friends live in that town. I always like to go up there and incorporate that into a visit to see them. But schedule wise, I just couldn't swing it. But I haven't seen Integrity play in a long time, so I need to go check them out soon.
I think I saw them last 2 years ago or something. It's been a while actually, but there were times where I saw them like on every tour they did, and I remember like one tour they did was with Convergent Coliseum. That was awesome. But I mean, yeah, I've seen them. I've seen them the first time, I think, the Seasons and the Size of Days tour, and that was, I don't know, 96, 97 maybe. Still with the Melnick brothers, and that was also like something that molded my whole view on how to play this music live.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I just wanted to mention too is most people out there are, well, I'm not going to say most people. Some of you out there are probably familiar with Holy Mountain Printing, which primarily is a merchandise company, web store for bands. They do merch for Integrity, they do merch for Leviathan, they do merch for Tombs for the band I play in, and Danny Trudell, the guy who runs that and owns and operates Holy Mountain, is a curator of all things, art related, music related. He's a big fan of like Japanese like monster movies. He's released records, things like that. So he's gonna start producing a magazine.
Wow!
And I actually I'm providing two pieces for that. One of them is an interview I did with Joe Bigos and Josh Ethier, these two filmmakers. They recently did the movie VFW, and last year they did the horror film Bliss. But related to what we're talking about, I'm writing a career retrospective for Integrity, and
wow.
I mean, that could be a book. You know what I mean? That could be like
yeah.
But it's going to show up in this magazine at some point this year as I'm assuming a serialized piece. I'm assuming it's going to be released over a couple of issues, and so I'm kind of, this whole slowdown with everything else in my life has given me time to work on that. So just it's kind of cool that we're talking about this because it kind of coincides with my execution of this piece.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if someone at some point would write something like a biography about Dwid and this band. But I don't know if they're a band that would ever have a book label to release it. I mean, there are so many books about so many random bands. So someone could do it, but it would be really great because I think there are like a lot of stories that you could tell. And it's just, really, the name Integrity and the way that Dwid has done this band is like there's no much more fitting name for a band and the reputation this guy has.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of rock and roll, like heavy metal books, punk books. And yeah, I'm surprised that nothing has come out really in the written word about the band as like a document about what the band's all about, because they have such a 30 plus year history.
Yeah. And also all the thing that goes along, all the side projects, all like the art that Dwid creates, and he creates a whole world. Like the whole thing about the band is not just the music; it's this whole universe he creates. And that's a thing that I always treasure. I treasure that with H.P. Lovecraft or with Stephen King. If people create a narrative, like their own universe in which all their art takes place, and I think Integrity has done that over all these years.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what I think would be cool is, did you ever read that Swan's oral history?
I did.
Yeah, I think that might be it's Sacrifice and Transcendence. That's what it's called. Yeah, I finished that a few weeks ago. That might be the perfect format for doing an Integrity thing, because there's so many different people involved. There's so many band members, record labels, people that have been influenced by the band, like things like that. I think you could not easily, but you could put something together very similar to that would tell the whole story.
Yeah, that would be amazing, because like all these lineup changes, all these shifts, especially in the phase after Seasons when he broke up with Lisa. And like the whole Integrity 2000 thing happened, and with all the different members exchanging the whole band, then doing Closure, and then going back to the hardcore roots, that would be really interesting, because it's kind of the way that Swans operated, from being super stubborn and then getting in the 80s, getting kind of soft in a way, and then breaking up, doing something different, getting back together, and like citing their old stuff as an influence, but doing something completely different. Yeah, it would be the perfect format to do it like that.
Yeah, I remember reading that book and thinking the same thing about how, it'd be kind of cool to get everyone's take. Because I know there's probably a lot of different, polarizing opinions too. So it'd be cool to get that all together at some point.
Yeah.
But we mentioned Mighty Sphincter, which is sadly a band that so few people seem to know about. And, you actually turned me on to them. And recently we lost Doug Clark, the guitar player from that band.
Yeah. Shame.
Yeah.
A totally underrated genius, totally underrated band. It's I don't know. Ever since I heard them the first time, the new Manson Family record, and especially like the Ghost Walking EP, that also, do you know the music video for Ghost Walking?
Yes, yeah, I've seen it.
Oh, dude, I love that. And I mean, we covered it with Ultha. That was like, I decided like, okay, we need to do a cover, and I want to cover that song because with Ultha we can pull it off. And as much as I think we did a good job, it's like whenever I listen to the original, I'm like, okay, it's unfuckwithable. It's so good. And also like their take on it's kind of like they're a black metal band without being a black metal band. They're a death rock band while being more death and more rock than every other death rock band. And I don't know why nobody knows them. I just know that they had like a weird reputation of being total psychos. And I mean, that's the reputation that Dwid has. So to some people, so it's just a perfect fit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, they had like these intertwined that AE389 records. They did a Pulling Teeth Mighty Sphincter split, and also the Resurrection 7-inch, where they had, I think it's also Nick of Pale Creation singing, or they doing a cover or something. Yeah, like they all like super into that. And I think the whole scene revolving, like a whole group of people are revolving around that. I think they all know Mighty Sphincter and appreciate that. I remember that Jay Popson, the singer of In Cold Blood, the first one, in State of Conviction, he did the second vocals on Intec 2000. He was also a big fan of Mighty Sphincter.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like this weird regionality. It's almost like you, my German friend, and dudes in Cleveland, Dwid, James from Ringworm, and me, and my friend Randy, who also co-hosts this show occasionally.
Yeah.
We're like the only people that I've run into that even know who the band is. I mentioned that name, even to like people I know that are hardcore, like death rock, like goth people, don't, people who love Christian death would love this band and they don't know who the hell they are. Or they're like, oh, I heard of them, but I don't really know the music.
Yeah. I know Mike Rekovics of Fell Voices and Yellow Eyes and all these bands. He's also a big fan of them. And when we toured with Vanum, his band, like we toured with them last year, and we hung out at my apartment the day before the tour started, and we played the video, and he and I were totally like obsessed. And Kyle and the other guys and Ash Borer who were in that band, they're like, I read the name once, don't really know them. Yeah. So, yeah, they're like a super secretive band, and I don't know why.
Yeah, and they had a new record that came out like last year, I think, too.
Yes.
And
yeah,
it's cool. It's a good record. It's it's a little bit different, but it's, I mean, who the hell wanted to listen to the same record over and over again, too? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But if you like the traits that this band has, like these weird guitar shifts and the weird arrangements, that is totally on Darkest Angel. So
yeah,
people, you can totally like it's like a black metal record from a band that's not a black metal band in a way. It's so dark, so nihilistic, and it's everything I loved about that band. So it's a shame I never saw them live. But there are some videos of like all the music videos they did, and there's a bunch of them that surfaced. They're all on YouTube now. They're really entertaining. This American Gothic kind of early 90s look. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I've only seen the Ghost Walking video. It looks like it's actually shot on film too, which I think is cool.
Yeah, and they have more. It's always these. They're always the same kind of creepo guys with their weird costumes, and also there's some live footage, and they're just an insane live band. And yeah, so hell, I never saw them. I never will see them live. That's a shame. Yeah.
I would say they're almost like a goth Germs or something like that. I mean, that's what comes to mind when I think about that band. But
agreed.
But yeah, so I mean, I guess that's it, man. We talked about Integrity, the Apocalypse, covered everything we wanted to discuss.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So I would ask you, normally this is at the point where I ask what's going on next, but that's unknown for the most part. I think for both of us, we don't know what the fuck's going on next.
Yeah, we'll see when we get there.
Yeah, but so anyway, thanks for taking time out and doing this, and thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll see you guys next time. That's it for this week's episode of Metal Matters, a Gimme Radio weekly podcast. Tune in next week and see what we have in store for you. The show is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Also, be sure to check out Gimme Radio, streaming on the web, iOS, or Android, for one of the best metal communities, exclusive merch, interviews with artists, and so much more. I'll catch you guys next week. Take care. Under the black of night, everything dies. No time for sudden transit. No time for misery.